trafficking is something that everybody needs to be aware of. So I'm just going to introduce Unstoppable You Ministries. We partner with many different agencies. Law enforcement is key. So Pennsylvania State Police, always, they're like phone a friends. And I just love and appreciate them. So we got Trooper Michael Reynolds, State Trooper Michael Reynolds. He serves with the Pennsylvania State Police in community engagement, where he works to strengthen relationships between law enforcement and communities they serve. The Office of Community Engagement works with legislators and municipal, state, and federal agencies to enhance community relations between the public and law enforcement. He is also joined by his co-presenter, which is Carrie Dwyer. Please put your hands together and welcome them to the stage.
First, I want to thank our host. Unstoppable You Ministries has been a phenomenal partner in this fight that we all work together to eliminate. Bringing this together here today, the work that's being done here today, the collaboration, the education, the awareness is what makes the difference, makes the real difference in this fight against human trafficking. It is an honor to stand amongst so many professionals and community members who share the same commitment in protecting victims and holding offenders accountable. That's huge. Before we get into this presentation, I do want to give you a disclaimer. This topic is going to bother you, right? We're all humans. We have a heart. It is going to bother you. So if there are young ones in the room that would like to step out now, I would take the opportunity to do so. It is appropriate for older teens and adults, but I did want to give you all that disclaimer. I will be presenting our intel analyst, our intelligence analyst, Carrie Dwyer. I said to myself, instead of me doing this presentation, I want to bring the person that actually created this presentation here for you, so that way we can give you the most accurate information. Is that okay with you all? Yeah. Phenomenal, phenomenal. And with that, I present Carrie Dwyer.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Trooper Reynolds, for asking me to come here this morning. I feel very grateful and blessed to be here to present human trafficking to everyone this morning. It's a very difficult and topic to talk about, but it's a very important one. Just a little quick background as to who I am and where I work. So I am in the Pennsylvania State Police, but I'm specifically in the Pennsylvania Criminal Intelligence Center. So PASIC is a state fusion center. So following the September 11th attacks, each state was designated a fusion center as a way of information sharing between state, local, and federal law enforcement agencies. This allows all different states to be able to work on investigations with one another. So if we have a suspect who is from Florida, we can reach out to the Florida Fusion Center, and they are able to provide us information, whatever they have on file for that person, and vice versa. We get requests from all different states, all different times. So we are 24/7. Law enforcement doesn't stop, so we don't stop either. So nights, weekends, holidays, we are there available for law enforcement to be able to answer the phone calls whenever something happens. We have officer-involved shootings all the time, hospital shootings. We're there to be able to work on those incidents immediately for law enforcement. So we do not stop. So we work closely with local law enforcement, having those dedicated phone lines and email addresses for law enforcement to reach out to us. But we do also have a critical infrastructure unit who works with private and public sector. So if you work in the education industry or at a hospital, we have those analysts who are able to give information to non-law enforcement as well. So for myself specifically, I am the human trafficking analyst. So I work closely with our troopers assigned to the organized crime unit who are investigating human trafficking cases. I also work with local law enforcement and federal agents on trafficking cases as well. So I'm kind of the brains behind the scenes of a trafficking case. So I'm putting the pieces of the puzzle together. I'm identifying the victims. I'm helping locate the victims. I'm helping to identify who our traffickers are. looking at financial records, cell phone records, all those important pieces to be able to build that investigation so we can hopefully come out with a successful prosecution at the end. So what is human trafficking? So human trafficking is considered to be a form of modern-day slavery in which a trafficker is going to take advantage of that victim and coerce them into engaging in commercial sex acts or labor services against his or her will. And it's estimated there's over 50 million victims of human trafficking worldwide. So when we talk human trafficking, there's actually 3 different types. So the first is going to be the commercial sexual exploitation of children. So that's children under the age of 18 who are induced into commercial sex with or without the use of force, fraud, and coercion. The second is adult sex trafficking. So that's adults 18 or older who are induced into commercial sex through the use of force, fraud, and coercion. And the third is labor trafficking. So that's children and adults induced to perform labor services against his or her will through, again, that use of force, fraud, and coercion. So the differences between the commercial sexual exploitation of children and adult sex trafficking is in an investigation, they don't have to prove any elements of force, fraud, and coercion if it's a child under the age of 18. Because they are a child, they cannot consent, and it's automatically going to be considered to be human trafficking. So who could be a victim of human trafficking? Anyone and everyone. Doesn't matter age, doesn't matter race, doesn't matter gender, doesn't matter if they're homeless living out on the streets or if they come from a nice wealthy family. Anybody can be a victim of human trafficking. It's estimated that every 30 seconds another person becomes a victim of trafficking. 100,000 victims, children are victims of trafficking in the United States, but I can estimate, or I can guarantee that number is way too low, honestly, way too low. And some of these victims can be infants or, toddlers. Like that's, as horrific as it sounds, children are being trafficked. Human trafficking is becoming such a big thing now because of the illicit proceeds and the amount of money that trafficking generates. How much money are we talking? So the International Labor Organization, they released their new report. This is last year that they put out their report, and they said that human trafficking is a $236 billion industry worldwide, but for both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, which that number was an increase of $64 billion from the last time they did that report, which was roughly 10 to 12 years ago. So it's becoming much more common because of the amount of money that trafficking generates. This is just a heat map from Polaris showing you all the hot spots in the United States. This one's kind of older, but honestly, it's probably about the same. You can still kind of make out Pennsylvania, the word Pennsylvania. So South Central Pennsylvania, so we're here in York, Harrisburg, Mechanicsburg, Carlisle, biggest hotspots, definitely in central Pennsylvania. Eastern PA, Northeast PA, Scranton, Philadelphia, all those areas are some of the biggest areas where we're seeing cases, as well as like the Pittsburgh area as well. So pretty much all of Pennsylvania is considered our hotspot, because we have so many of those interstates, turnpike, they all kind of intersect with one another, so you're getting all that out-of-state traffic coming through Pennsylvania. So that's why Pennsylvania is such a big hotspot for human trafficking. Just a graphic, when we teach law enforcement, we always show this graphic as to how labor trafficking and sex trafficking can be found in any different types of investigation. So sex trafficking and drugs just go hand in hand. Gangs are turning to human trafficking versus drugs and firearm trafficking because it's a lot easier to get away with. If a gang member is pulled over in a traffic stop, he has a kilo of cocaine in the car, they find that cocaine, they're getting arrested right away, right? But if they have a 21-year-old female in the car with them, they're not being, present with that person isn't a crime, right? So they're going to be able to get away with it. They're able to hide it a lot easier than they would, the drugs and the firearms. And with a person, that person is there all the time. Like that person can then go out and recruit more and more victims. But once they get rid of their drugs and they sell it, they have to keep finding more and more products, right? So it's just a lot easier for like these gangs to get away with human trafficking. Runaway juveniles, who are they running away to? Who are they, communicating with? Who are they running away from? So we see a lot, runaway juveniles and that child sexual exploitation are going hand in hand as well. So there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation on social media as to how trafficking occurs. People always think about the movie Taken when they think of human trafficking, that this beautiful blonde girl from a wealthy family is getting kidnapped from her house and trafficked in Europe. That's not what trafficking looks like, right? So kidnapping and trafficking, honestly, they just don't go hand in hand. There are cases, where a person has been kidnapped and they were trafficked, but it's not what we're seeing. This is on social media all the time, where somebody comes out to their car at Target and Walmart. They have a zip tie on like the door handle or like the windshield, and that means that they're being trafficked. Or like they find like tallies on the back of their windshield, and that means that their car has been targeted by a trafficker to be trafficked. Like that, all that is misinformation that gets shared on social media nonstop. I just saw something the other day that showed up on my news feed about, a car in a parking lot that had like a water bottle on it, and I was like, oh man, people think it's true because it's on social media, and like no matter how many presentations I do, no matter how many times I talk to a coworker, like they still think stuff like that is how trafficking occurs. So just be careful what you're seeing on TikTok, Instagram, all those social media sites. And then this was an older one. It was a Wayfair scandal from 2020 where they were saying that if you purchase this $20,000 cabinet on Wayfair, that you were actually purchasing a missing child to traffic that child. Again, this is just all the misinformation that gets shared on social media, but people think it's true because, oh, well, so-and-so shared it, so it must be true, so now I have to share it, and it just explodes, and that's just how that misinformation gets spread. So where are traffickers looking for victims? So if we're talking in person, they want somebody who's trying to get clean. Human trafficking and drug addiction really just go hand in hand. I really don't know one victim that we have who hasn't had some sort of drug addiction that they're dealing with. So rehab centers, bus stations, runaways who are hanging outside of a bus station trying to get a ticket somewhere to get out of town. We had one of our victims who was homeless and she was sleeping outside of a bus station. That's where she came in contact with her traffickers. Bars and clubs, so they're looking out for the vulnerable. They want the naive, somebody who's a little more shy, who isn't as confident as like if she's out with a group of friends. They want the person that they can easily take advantage of. Schools, gang members will hang outside of schools to get them to kind of come hang out with them at their parties after school. Teen group homes, and as difficult as it is to say, families. Parents traffic their children. Maybe they have a drug debt to pay off. Maybe they just want to have get rent for the next month. But families do find trafficking within families. And then the internet, social media, Snapchat, all like the gaming apps like Discord, all those types of things. That's everyone can remain anonymous on social media. Everybody can catfish somebody else easily on social media. So you have to be cognizant of who you're talking to on those social media sites, dating apps, escort sites. So a trafficker is going to look for a person who's already engaging in commercial sex, working for themselves, because they know that they can easily just take advantage of that person. But the reality is traffickers are going to find their victims anywhere. Just again with social media, so like I said, you can catfish, you can remain anonymous on social media, so it's a lot easier to find victims. They can get more victims that way. It's easier to recruit and groom victims that way. They follow their pages, so they're going to see what are they posting, what are their favorite, sports teams, what are, their hobbies or activities. I don't know how well you can see the little conversation to the right, but this was an actual conversation that had occurred, not one of our cases, but so it was a victim who came in contact with their trafficker on, I think it was like Facebook Messenger, but he's like, hey, I saw your story about that guy, and he doesn't know what he's given up with a girl like you. He's gone, but I worry about my daughter. So that's her vulnerability, is that she's a single mom. And he talks about her being a vegan, and she asks him, oh, are you a vegan too? As a way to like build that communication and build that trust with that conversation. Do you think he's a vegan? No, absolutely not. But that's his way of, just being able to latch on that conversation and build it and keep it going. So in those definitions of trafficking, it talks about the force, fraud, and coercion, but what does that mean exactly? I know they're separated by sex trafficking and labor trafficking, but the reality is all those different examples can be found in either type of case. So they're reducing or exploiting substance abuse issues. Again, they go for the vulnerable, so they want those who have a drug addiction because they know they're going to be easier to control. Some victims have never touched drugs at all in their lives, but the traffickers will eventually force them to take heroin, take pills as a way to control their movements, and eventually they'll develop a substance abuse issue. Physical abuse. I have never seen so much, horrific physical abuse with some of our victims. I mean, just severe beatings, gang rapes, cigarette burns. They hold knives to their throats, a gun to their head. If they're driving, trafficker's gonna have that gun at his waistband. Say, look, if you don't bring 1,500 home tonight, you know what can happen to you. So it's just constant verbal, physical threats. Emotional abuse, especially if that victim has children. If you don't do as I say, bring home all that money, you're gonna find your child out on the street. So what parent wouldn't do whatever they possibly could to protect their child? They're gonna do what that trafficker says. Labor, withhold their pay. Victims aren't keeping any money that they were being forced to make. They work excessive working hours. So if it's a hot summer day and that it's a labor trafficking victim, they're being forced, to work out in that sun all hours of the day with no protection, no water, no food breaks, not going to the hospital if they have heat exhaustion or dehydration, just some terrible things that they're being forced to go through. Verbal abuse, they're just constantly being berated, using derogatory names towards, whatever their ethnicity is, and just withholding or denying any essential needs. So just victims are just put through just absolute horrific things. So who are at most victims at most risk for being a victim of human trafficking? I'm not going to get into all of these, but again, it's like the most vulnerable. So if we're talking children, those who are being bullied, maybe somebody who's being, questioning, their sexual orientation, and they feel like their parents aren't accepting them, right? So those are the types of people who are going to want to go out on social media and look for maybe social media groups that they can maybe connect with. So that's where they could possibly come in contact with the trafficker there. Juveniles, children who are just constantly running away from home, in and out of the juvenile justice systems, just constantly getting in trouble. Retail thefts are really big. If we have a, local law enforcement just investigating a simple retail theft, and maybe it's like an 18-year-old girl just trying to steal, whatever she can just to get by. But eventually, a lot of those who have just those simple retail thefts, those eventually develop into those more vulnerable things with, drug addictions. Housing instability, not to bring up, the politics of what's going on right now, but with the government shutdown and the lack of SNAP funding, guess what's going to happen? Single women are going to be taken advantage by their landlords. They're not going to be. They don't have the money to get their food that they need. people are going to take advantage of that. Like 100% that's going to be happening. Like it's not even like maybe it could, no, it's going to be happening. Unfortunately, maybe somebody's going to sell their child just so they can get food for a day. Like, unfortunately, those big issues that are occurring is where you're going to find human trafficking. I already discussed a lot of that. Skip. Just talking about sex trafficking, and then I'll go into labor trafficking. I know I'm short on time, but so each trafficker kind of uses their own MO, if you will, as to how they locate their victims, how they groom their victims and take advantage of them. So they target their victims, noticing that vulnerability, whatever it is that they can to take advantage of them. So again, drug addictions, maybe they're just a single mom, and they just kind of swoop on in and be that trusted friend or that potential love interest to that person, and they start to feel like they're the answer to their prayers, their dreams, that listening ear, like nobody else cares about you the way I care about you. And then eventually they start filling that need. So, give that person shelter, become a potential father to that child. And eventually they start to isolate them from their families. There's not a lot of communication back, with their families. Sometimes they'll still be allowed to communicate with them. But eventually, they're cut off completely from their friends and family because they just start to rely solely on what that trafficker is giving them. And then that's when the abuse again begins. Look at all these nice things I did for you. I gave you shelter. I took your kid to school. I bought all these nice things for you guys. Well, guess what? You have to repay everything that I gave to you. And how are you going to repay me? By going out and engaging in commercial sex and bringing home a specific amount of money each and every night. And then they just constantly maintain control through threats, that violence, fear, and blackmail. So potential indicators to look out for. So sudden changes in appearance and or behavior. So, these victims are not sleeping properly, eating properly. They're going through drug addictions. So they're just malnourished, exhausted. They're not going to the doctor. They're not taking care of, their teeth, they're not showering, they're not bathing properly, they're just constantly on the go, they're working all hours of the day and the night, so they're just completely disoriented. Chronically running away from home, for especially like the juveniles. Somebody who's coming suddenly has large amount of cash and you don't know where that's coming from. Tattoos, and they're reluctant to explain the tattoos. So if they have a name that's tattooed on them and they don't want to explain who that name is, a lot of traffickers brand their victims by having their names tattooed on them. So that's a big one to look out for. Anything that says daddy, daddy's girl, P, the letter P, P for pimp. The number 16 is a big one that we see on social media a lot because P is the 16th letter of the alphabet. Again, P for pimp. Anything with like a crown and initials for the trafficker. A lot of traffickers in like bigger cities, not necessarily here in Pennsylvania, but they'll give them diamond necklaces with their initials on in diamonds. So a lot of traffickers will get their victims that way. Somebody who's in close association with an overly controlling adult. If we're ever teaching hotel staff about the indicators of trafficking, and we really hone in on like an older male who's coming in with like younger female, but the male is constantly controlling that entire conversation. 2 minutes? Okay. I'll skip this. Children indicators. Those who are missing school regularly, sudden loss of interest in school, and then just that sudden change in behavior. And then I would say a big one, overly sexualized online presence, especially for a younger child. Just real quick on labor trafficking, these are going to be the most common avenues where we're going to find labor trafficking. I would say the biggest one that we're seeing would be massage parlors, and then forced crimes. So somebody who's being forced to commit a retail theft or commit identity theft. That's actually considered to be a form of labor trafficking, and that's ones that I would say is what we're seeing the most often. I'll probably just skip that. Just indicators for labor trafficking. So those pressure to stay in a job that they don't want to leave, owing money to their employer, not keeping any money that they're making, living and working in isolated conditions. So, if they're working on a farm, a lot of times they'll be sleeping in trailers, 15 people deep, and the trailers aren't gonna have running water or electricity or any of that. And again, just not being able to have protections from like working outside if it's hot or too cold outside. I'll just skip that. Most important thing is what can you do and how can you report it? So I know a few of you have already picked up the flyers back there, but we have them, and then we have the little business cards out there. So if you want to report possible human trafficking tips, that's how you can do it, and you can take those with you as you leave. And then just any questions, if you want to reach out to me and learn more or find out where you can find additional resources, by all means, reach out to me directly. But sorry, I had to kind of fly through that. Yeah, but I'll be back there if you have any follow-up questions.
It's a lot of information, I recognize that, but what I hope we can all take from this is that anyone can be a victim, so just keep your eyes open. If you see something, please say something. We have tip lines set up. Our purpose out here today is just to educate and raise awareness, and we can't do that without the public, so we really appreciate you all. Thank you.